Anyone who knows me knows I love music, and I take it pretty serious. I built this speaker you see here and a matching one on the other side. There's a couple subwoofers down here you can just see the tops of. With the help of a couple friends, I built those. I arranged my office so that my chair is in the prime listening spot, right in the middle of those, and I end a lot of days just listening to music. Again, I really like it, and I think God's people have always liked music and realized, and God realizes how important it is. That's why an entire book of the Bible is the hymn book of the Old Testament. I'm talking about the book of Psalms. In one sense, you could consider it the original Christian music channel. Well, I hope you like this video over a psalm, and if so, then if you do me a favor and click the thumbs up, leave a comment, I always love that, and or share it on a social media site like Facebook, that would be a huge help. Thanks a lot. If you wear glasses like I do to read and see some things I need to see up close, you've experienced a smudge on your glasses. You look through them and things aren't clear. Things are distorted. Well, even if you don't wear glasses, I'm sure you can understand that. And I'm sure you can understand how that applies to life, that we look out at life sometimes and our view of it, our perspective is smudged. It's looking through a smudge. It's distorted. And there's a passage in the Bible that I saw that made me think of this. Psalm 73. The psalmist says, "Truly God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled. My steps had nearly slipped." And he gives the reason, "For I was envious of the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked." So his specific instance, and this is a psalm of Asaph, a musical leader, but apparently not someone who was rich. He looked out and he saw the rich. And in this case, wicked, arrogant rich, people opposed to God, but yet they were wealthy, and the benefits, he goes on to list through that. They didn't have to worry about things. They had the best food and all of it they wanted, and so many things that on one level, in one sense, are advantages, blessings of being wealthy. And he said, it made my feet almost stumble. My steps had nearly slipped. It threw me. It affected my attitude and certainly my relationship with God. Well, that doesn't have to be the specific situation we're facing. Anytime something happens in our life and throws us a little, that, again, maybe a difficult situation we're going through and it causes some anger, it causes some worry, whatever that might be as we first look out on it. And it's not easy to get over that at first. The more difficult it is, if we've grown through something, if we've seen it before, but there are times when it is difficult. And verse 16 talks about this. He says, "But when I thought how to understand this, how to regain a perspective, it seemed to me a wearisome task." At first, just thinking about it, I couldn't wrap my head around it. Why? Is this? Why do they get that advantage? Why am I going through this? Why is this happening? Seemed wearisome, but his key for doing it is in verse 17, "Until I went into the sanctuary of God." Until he went into the sanctuary. Now, there's nothing magical about that, but it helped him then to get a more godly spiritual perspective. And so for us, what's it going to take? Well, if, going into a church building or whatever helps, okay, but there's got to be something that accompanies that. I've got to get into the Word and see it there. I've got to talk to another friend, another believer to help get that, get some situations, and examine them and see what God has done. The growth triangle, hopefully you recognize that among those three, but that is key. I've got to intentionally realize my perspective is off, my glasses are smudged, what do I need to do to clear them? All right, God. And then the key to his different perspective, what helps him see things in the right way, in verse 17, "Until I went into the sanctuary of God, then I discerned their end." What's going to ultimately happen to them, to these wealthy who are wicked, who are opposed to God? What's the eternal perspective here versus the temporary perspective? Temporarily, right, at that point, they had life good in some ways. They had everything they wanted. They didn't have to worry. But he realizes, being opposed to God, their eternal fate is not good. And it's much worse. It's way better to lack in the material things now and have this relationship with God that will lead to an eternity with Him. That's what puts things into perspective when he views them that way. And that, it reminded me as I'm preaching through the Gospel of Mark, the theme there really is about this need to focus on the spiritual versus the physical. Jesus comes bringing the spiritual perspective and focus, and he's constantly confronting the physical focus of even his own disciples. And as I've gone through that, I've said that, to think of, spiritual and physical, they're like column headings. And underneath that, there's all of these related things. The spiritual, physical. Well, you've got to focus on God versus a focus on me, a focus on heaven versus earth, eternal versus temporary, all of that, even grace versus works. And so you realize, and as we do that, the way it ties in here, that can help to show us where our focus is. I face a situation, I realize, okay, this is causing me to stumble some in my relationship with God, my attitude, whatever it is. Why is that? Oh, I see. I've been focused on something in the physical column. That's affecting my perspective. I've got a temporary earthly perspective instead of an eternal heavenly perspective. It helps us recognize it. It also helps us strengthen it, because anything I'm focusing on in the column is going to help me in general. So if I'm focusing on God, it's going to help that whole side. If I'm focusing on heaven, if I'm focusing on the eternal, if I'm focusing on grace, it's going to help ingrain that perspective so that when I do face things, maybe they don't shake me. Maybe they don't shake me as much or as long. That's one key mark of growth. I don't get rocked as much or for as long. I come back around sooner. So in both senses, it helps me identify my perspective. It helps me strengthen my perspective when I focus on the spiritual, eternal side. Just what he did to come around here. We're going to face things. They'll shake us to one degree or the other. Other people will face things and same effect. So for me and myself, for me helping others, this psalm is certainly a key. It shows what needs to happen, and we need to get back to that godly perspective, and helps us do that as well.